All right, so let's change the subject now. So um, let's just say whether or not you're a believer. Let's not put it in terms of non-believing, or believing. Let's talk about what happens when you start to engage healthy sexuality as a single person. What does that look like? Like, I can imagine either someone's newly divorced and they're petrified about like, how do I date now? I can have sex with whoever I want, but I don't want to be irresponsible, unsafe. How do I even go about it? I can think of a 19-year-old who, let's just say, no longer believes in the church.
Mm-hmm.
And she's just like, or he's like, hey, okay, I don't believe in this law of chastity anymore, but I don't want to hurt myself or go crazy. How does one begin healthy sexuality if they've been raised as a Mormon on the strength of the youth pamphlet? What's step one? Who wants to give us step one?
That's a great question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Michelle.
I'll give step one. I think step one is making the decision on your own. For me, it was a very, very thoughtful decision where I think, maybe when you're in your teens or your early 20s, it's less thoughtful. It's just kind of something that you've got to do, or, maybe as non-members, or, it's something that, you do maybe when you're drunk, or just because that's what people do, or whatever the case may be. I think especially for post-Mormons or people transitioning out of the church, and I would hope for everybody everywhere, that it's more of a thoughtful decision, because when you make the decision and you choose to have those experiences with people that you, one, feel safe with, and two, feel like I don't know, it's not just, I don't know. I don't want to generalize. I don't want to say that everyone should have the same kind of sexual experience, but I do think that the first step is really thinking about it, figuring out if it's okay for you, what is okay for you, if it's something that you really want, and then move forward from there.
So start, and Margie, I think you mentioned this in the show notes, kind of doing a dive on your values. What are your values?
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, I think as religious people, and sometimes as Mormons, we've really corrupted the term values. We think values, to have values means I don't drink alcohol. To have values means I don't smoke pot or steal. To have values means I'm not a liar. That's actually a real unfortunate corruption of the word value. The word value means, what do I value in my life? What do I want in my life? What do I want my life to stand for? And in that context of the meaning of the word value, if we're talking about sexuality, it's, do I value myself as a sexual being? What types of sexual expressions are important to me?
What does healthy sexuality for me look like? What is intimacy to me?
What is intimacy? What is emotional intimacy as well as physical intimacy? And even, what do I, this is something that I've had to struggle with for so many years, because we were taught not to even have sexual thoughts. Women became sexual objects in my mind. They were objects to look at to derive sort of like visual satisfaction. And I'm not thrilled about that. I'm not proud of that. But women became objectified to me. And so when I was lonely or sad as a single person, I would make out with a girl because it would make me feel better. And all of a sudden, and I did not process this until after I was married and had to do my own work. But women were sometimes just objects that brought me pleasure. And I think that was a problem. And it became something that was really helpful to me as I thought about my own values relating to being faithful to Margi. It's, okay, there's an attractive woman, but do I value my wife? Do I value my commitment to her? And this woman, whether I was single or not, if I were to just want to go have sex with her and then just bail, am I treating her, do I value treating that woman like a human being, that her feelings matter, that who she is matters. Now, there may be women where that would be a fine type of relationship, but in many cases, I think I wasn't concerned about the other person. I was concerned about just my own gratification. And so one possible value to consider is, do you value the inherent worth of the people that might be your sexual partner? And what does it mean to treat another person with respect as it relates to sexuality? So that was kind of a rant, but have any of you had to develop your own sense of values as it relates to sexuality? And if so, can you share some of your values that inform your sexuality?
Can I say something really quick?
Please.
So I don't want to repeat a little bit of what Natasha and I talked about, but she listed those 6 principles for healthy sexuality.
Right.
And I might just list them really quick and then give my 2 cents on them. The 6 principles, and this is by Doug Braun Harvey and Michael Vigorito. But number 1 is consensual, 2, non-exploitative, 3, protective against HIV, STIs, and unplanned pregnancy, 4, shared values, 5, honest, and 6, mutually pleasurable. I think that these are really good baseline, which of course people can say, no, I don't really think it needs to be mutually pleasurable. That's up to them. But these are like interesting, like places to start. What do I think about these? How will I negotiate between these? Do I want to date people that feel similarly about all of these or some of these? Maybe these can be areas to negotiate and talk more about when we're getting to know each other. Those types of things. So did I segue?
That was great. I'm glad you mentioned it.
I love those, Kristin. And I think I want to actually go through each one with the panel and talk about how they apply those principles, if they apply them in their own sex lives or sexuality. But let me first ask one of my sort of obvious and blunt, semi-offensive questions. Is it okay to have, sex outside of marriage? The church has taught us it's wrong and it's evil. Is there an argument for the possibility that extramarital sex is actually healthy for a developing human?
Absolutely.
Can any of you, how? I mean, the law of chastity says no. The prophets of God have said no. Whether or not you believe in that, how could you make an argument that that's not so? And what are you basing it on?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, Kristin.
Okay.
And then others.
Okay. Well, I'll usually break these up into teeny topics, but it's not long. So there's the spiritual consequences for those that might consider, breaking the law of chastity, going outside of marriage. Like there's the spiritual domain. There's actual physical risks that can happen by being sexually active within marriage or without. Like that can certainly take place. So anytime I hear, is it okay? Like in what way is what I usually am asking. Is it because the blanket answer that I have is it depends on the person, So if they are practicing, believing LDS, then they're probably going to have some consequences. Down here in Orem, I work with a lot of BYU students or BYU employees. There are consequences to potentially their academics. They're not only just spiritual, right? So it just depends on the person as to whether or not it's okay in their mind to go outside of what, I guess, law of chastity or violating covenants or whatnot, promises they've made. That's a spiel. I don't know.
So there are risks.
But there are risks at not as well. There are risks at stunting development. There are risks at, like Ryan was saying, I think he nailed a really, really good topic that's largely not talked about, because we don't talk about single people, but of missed opportunities, because there's this, like along the Wasatch Front, I don't know if any of you others have heard this, but the BBD, the bigger, better deal, like a lot of people are passing up other like really great potential like dating opportunities, because there's this kind of perfectionism also in dating, right? That's not the only reason people aren't married. I don't want it to become about that, but there's a phenomenon of there's something better coming along, right? So,
yeah.
I don't know.
Okay.
Anyway.
Thank you.
That made me think, because at 21 and 22, if you're taking on kind of the structure of what oftentimes you're hearing about what you should be looking for, I think by the time you hit 30, that can feel very different or a little less applicable to you. So the things you value at 30 in a relationship oftentimes look very different than what you would have gone for when you were 21 or 22.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, others, are any of you comfortable being an advocate for single sexuality, to telling why it's okay, why it's beneficial?
Okay. All about, tying it back to values, my short answer is yes, it can be good. But like Kristin said, it kind of depends on the person. And if I was going to talk to a friend right now going through the same transitions that I kind of went through of, being, single and kind of getting into some new things, it's kind of the same advice I'd give to anybody going through any transition, sexual or religious or whatever. It's wherever you land softly. Be careful how you do it, and try and, do it in a way that you're able to identify those values. One interesting thing is, we start to get into, okay, well, I'm no longer confined by your religious restrictions. I view you as very, very large. Kristin and Natasha talked about that in the last episodes. And by the way, I'll put a plug for the last episode. If you don't realize this is a series on sexuality, they've talked about that heavily. I mean, there's fetishes. There are different ways to look at sex. There's no partners. If you can imagine it, it's likely been tried. It's likely been enjoyed. So there are so many things out on the table that, you have to kind of like say, okay, well, what is it that I do want and don't want? Sex, kind of sleeping around or experimenting, it can be a good thing. You can kind of do it in a healthy way of, hey, I'm doing that with respect with a partner, but also as, it can be an experience where if done right, you can learn, you can grow, you can feel a lot of emotions I wouldn't have. So as long as you're kind of careful and comfortable with how you do it, it can be a very healthy thing.
Okay, and Ryan, I think you're referencing our discussion on understanding your own sexual template and what your erotic template is, and knowing what the types of things that kind of make you happy, that please you, that turn you on versus don't. Is that right, Ryan?
Yeah, because looking at the limitations of the church, they're very specific on what kind of are you wearing, how you're having sex. There's some things that are kind of borderline sex. Do it. Those things are questionable. It's very limiting. And all of a sudden you start to progress. And you're like, okay, I no longer have those limits. Where do I go? The menu is very.
Got it. Okay. Michelle, what would you say to this question? Are you even comfortable talking to it?
Yeah, I will speak to it. It's funny, right before I started this podcast, my mom called me, and she's kind of post-Mormon group, and she was like, Michelle, why didn't you tell me you were doing this podcast? And I'm like, because and I was like, don't tune into this.
Yeah.
Listen to it later. Anyway, I probably have family listening right now, so we'll see. I was promising myself not to be too candid. But I will say that I do advocate for sex before marriage. And I also say that if you're not comfortable with it, then that's also fine. There shouldn't be shame one way or the other, whether you choose to wait until marriage or not. This panel is obviously different. If you had a panel of active, true believing Mormons, then they would probably say, they don't support it. I think for me, I think it's actually really important just so to understand your sexual compatibility with that person. But also, I have a lot of friends who get married and there's a lot of sexual dysfunction that happens. They've gotten married and either their expectations were too high or they have no idea how to communicate about sex. I actually think more than anything, that is one of the biggest problems, is just the inability to communicate about sex.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't do that, whether you're both inexperienced or not, it's going to be a rough road, So in my mind, I think that it's you figuring out what works for you, what's comfortable for you is a really good thing. understanding what it means to be sexually compatible with somebody, understanding how to communicate a little bit. I think it actually is a very positive and human thing. And I also think that what happens is, I remember back when I was still like 19, I was very active Mormon, had a friend who was 25 and she had never kissed somebody. And she at that point was like, well, I'm not going to kiss anybody until I'm, across the altar, or until I find the person I'm going to marry. I'm going to wait. And kissing had become this huge, huge deal to her. And I'm not equating sex with kissing, but I kind of am, because I think what happens is you just blow it up in your mind and it becomes this thing that is really unattainable. So then when you actually have sex, it's not at all what you expected or wanted or thought it was going to be. And so I think it can be a really healthy thing to experience that before you go into a committed, lifelong relationship.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
But let me push a little bit further, because and maybe you guys, maybe because of our cultural taboos, nobody is quite in. I mean, Michelle, you just did it, but even what you just said, Michelle, you said it's good to be sexually active as a single person because it prepares you for marriage. And I want to ask even a more basic question. Are you happier and healthier as an adult human when you're sexually active,
Mm-hmm.
whether or not you end up getting married?
Yes.
Paul, okay. Michelle, how? How's that possible? They say wickedness never was happiness.
Well, and that's the problem, is apparently we don't think it's wicked,
So how are you happier and healthier? How can that be, that you're actually happier and healthier?
It's the human condition. We were made to procreate. We biologically, that's how it is. And I also think that it breaks down emotional barriers, that maybe walls that you've built. I think that it can help you just be more open, and I don't know. It just, there's so many reasons to experience that. And like I said, I don't want to say that everyone needs to. I don't want to say that, because there are people out there who won't experience or can't or don't want to. But I do want to say that if it's an option for you, it is a positive thing in a lot of ways, just for your mental health, your emotional health. I hear it makes your hair shinier, your skin clearer, lots of benefits.
All right, Paul, well, how would you answer that question?
Well, just to put my opinion on that last question, if you don't have sex while you're dating, and then you get married, that you've committed dating malpractice, in my opinion. But if, I think we're sexual beings, and every one of us is different, but we probably most of us have that one thing in common. And if you're someone that, I think someone might need it more, someone might need it less, but everyone needs it, and it's healthy, and and we know that it's not bad. We know that it's not a sin, because the church exalts it above all else.
What do you mean?
Well, the church says that the only way to achieve exaltation is through marriage, eternal marriage. So we know that it's a beautiful thing. They're just labeling it a sin before you enter into one of their temples. That's to get their 10%. Maybe that's a little too harsh.
Oh, okay.
But it's we know that it's not bad because the church says it's not bad. They've just defined the context. It's time to take that back. Okay.
Kristin, why can being sexually active as a single person actually be healthy?
Well, our bodies are, I think a few people have said so far, we are programmed to reproduce, so to speak. But I think it's even more integral than that. I think we are relational beings, and intimacy, sexual intimacy is some of the, I think it's in most of our DNA. Like Paul said, it's a spectrum for each person. Very rare when someone doesn't want that at all. That's very, very, that's a pretty rare case, does happen. But yeah, we're relational beings. We're not meant to be on an island by ourselves and to be devoid of touch and intimate touch, and to feel that if you do want it, that's bad, and that you're sinning and going to not have blessings in the future, creates quite a disconnect between something that is an integral part of who we are as humans. So yeah, I think that can really, that's what I believe can come at a cost if somebody just completely thinks that should not be an active part of their life.
Got it. A lot of the listeners are saying that they love that list that you read, Kristin, and Amy mentioned that we're going to be including that in the show notes. But let's go through it. Let's talk about how to put into practice each of the principles. So what I'm going to do is, Kristin, I'm going to have you read each one. But after you read each one, I want panelists to jump in and say how that principle has applied to them in their sex lives as single people. So Kristin, read number 1, please.
Number 1 should always be number 1, consensual.
Okay.
Mutually consensual. So both people want to play.
All right. So who wants to talk about how consent has played into their relationships?
I'll take this one as kind of, I've never been married. And so from somebody who jumped the gap from, being kind of a, single virgin to, kind of jump that gap and to start dating and experimenting sexually. When I looked at marriage or sex before I'd done it, I always thought, okay, well, great, I'm going to do it when I'm married. Obviously she's interested. Obviously there's some commitment here, and there's an environment where, we're both expecting that. So consent was something you have to kind of learn over time. And I mean, it could probably be its own separate podcast in and of itself, but it is something to highlight here, where again, this is the male perspective. Or, if you're starting to pursue a female and, you kind of see, okay, well, things are progressing, things are escalating. You have to be sure you're reading the cues, the body language, you're not overstepping your bounds. If she's feeling any discomfort, and whether she communicates that verbally or with her body language at all, stop. I mean, that's the answer. You do not want.
Ryan, we're having a bit of technical difficulties with your video. So I'm gonna hop over to Kristin and see if your video's issues can get resolved. Kristin, what do you like about what Ryan's saying, and how would you extend it?
I think that it's great what I heard him saying there at the end. And I think that's what I heard him saying was, if you are picking up on nonverbal cues, certainly verbal cues, but even nonverbal, that someone's uncomfortable, check in with them is what I would extend that. Definitely, slow things down, but check in with them, because especially if you are both navigating this new terrain, and certainly one is, this is an opportunity for you to both get really good at negotiating what sounds good, what sounds fun, at least for right then. It might change in 5 minutes. That's sexuality. That's okay. But to continually check in with each other and hopefully learn the style that they have of communicating. I do know a lot of, as women in the church, we were really socialized to defer to someone else for what's okay and to also take care of others' feelings. It might be really hard for, I don't want to overgeneralize, but I'll do it anyway, for a woman to start using her voice in really, really vulnerable situations like sexual situations. And so if you're with someone, it might be nice to encourage them, hey, I do want to hear where you're at with what's going on. Like, that's welcome.
Mm-hmm.
Michelle, what has consent meant to you in your sex life? From a practical standpoint, how do you navigate consent?
This is a tough one for me to answer, because I don't feel like this has ever really been a problem, maybe, or an issue. I think
for you, it's been pretty obvious when both were interested in what you were interested in. It was just kind of natural.
Yeah. And I think, and maybe I'm speaking stereotypically here, but I do feel like typically it's the woman who has to give consent. I don't know. Am I being stereotypical? here.
Women are the gatekeepers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Kind
that's a myth, right? That's not a fair burden to put on women, right?
Well, yeah, we want to get away from that, but it still
Right.
feels heavily like in the culture of
Mhm.
that we're allowing this to happen.
Right.
Right.
Right. It definitely feels that way. So, I feel like for the most part, I mean, I've only had good experiences in terms of like, it's not just about that initial experience. It's about, like, oh, are you feeling like it today? Or are you feeling like it, I don't know, tonight or in the morning or whatever, whatever it is, like there's always like, it's constant consent. So it's not just you give your consent one time and then that's how it is forever. It's kind of a constant dance going back and forth and figuring it all out with the person you're with,
Okay.
It's a great point.
I remember reading a sign at a university about what consent is, and I'm not going to remember all the points, but one of the things I remember reading is that consent is sober, meaning that if someone is drunk, they cannot, they can't. That doesn't constitute consent. Consent is conscious. Consent is verbal or explicit. I don't know if that's always true, but I think I get what these cues were sort of getting at, which is err on the side of caution. And one thing I always hear is no means no, and that's what no means, not no means yes. Paul, how has consent played into your relationships?
Well, very heavily. But I mean, I can't, I've tried in the few relationships that I've had since my marriage to just be, I think my biggest value has just been, to take it back to that, also has just been trying to communicate and trying to be open and always trying to see where the other person is and reciprocating. And I think as long as there's just constant communication and there's never really any reason for there not to be, the relationship, however it progresses, if it progresses to whatever stage it progresses, will be a healthy one, at least in my experience.
Love it. Okay, Kristin, what's number 2?
Number 2 is non-exploitative.
Okay, what do you think that means, Kristin?
Stay the heck away from being coercive or, guilting people, making them feel like their consent's not really that, or manipulative.
Okay, so you don't coerce or pressure.
It's not very nice.
Ryan, Paul, or Michelle, do any of you have any experiences you want to share about how coercion is not a good thing?
Yeah, and this is Ryan. Hopefully my internet connection apparently is bad, so hopefully it's a little bit more stable now, so I apologize for that. But yeah, I mean, as far as exploitative or coercive, you definitely don't want to kind of take advantage or manipulate or kind of use someone for your own gain. If you're going to, have a sexual partner, you want there to be kind of mutual benefit, mutual value in doing so. And I just say, watch your limits on that.
So it's about mutual pleasure. And I think that actually leads in, there's going to be one later on about that. Michelle or Paul, anything else you guys want to mention about coercion or exploitation? No, not Michelle. Paul?
I mean, I think it's something that maybe, depending on where you are, where your status is, it might be something that I could see myself in my former Mormon self having maybe a bigger issue with that. So I don't know, but I don't really know how to address it. I mean, I just think that maybe with all of the priesthood talk and all of the male superiority talk inside the church, that maybe that's an issue navigating dating life, maybe subconsciously for us. I don't know.
You're theorizing that maybe a patriarchal structure can set men up to be coercive and manipulative, and Kristin's nodding her head. Kristin, why are you nodding your head?
Oh, I think that's a strong theory.
Yeah.
Especially when, anecdotally, I've heard quite a few stories of teenage boys kind of having these discussions that she didn't want it, but I made her want it, you know. And I mean, that's not necessarily from the church, you know, but that's still, we're all existing in a patriarchal culture right now anyway, you know. And so just that women don't have their own autonomy, sexual autonomy, that men need to bring them into it or introduce them to it. So if she's showing hesitancy, you just need to keep trying. You know, that's really dangerous, really, really, really unhealthy.
Yeah. And can I just
Please
add to that? I did think of something. I feel like I want everyone listening who maybe is exploring sexuality, and especially because this is new to a lot of people who are kind of transitioning out of the church, or maybe kind of exploring their sexuality in the church or whatever it may be. There's never a point that you can't say no, you know? So just because you're making out and, you know, maybe some clothes coming off or whatever, if you at any point start feeling uncomfortable, there's never a point that you need to feel in your mind like, oh, well, I've already gone this far, so, you know, he or she is going to be mad at me if I don't, even though I'm not really feeling comfortable anymore. You know, there's never a point where you can't say, you know, I'm uncomfortable now, and I'm not okay with this anymore, or maybe we should cool it and, you know, talk tomorrow or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So you can say no at any time.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, Kristin, what's the next one?
Protective against HIV, STIs, and unplanned pregnancy.
Okay. Kristin, as a sex therapist, can you give us a brief primer on how to do these things?
Yeah, I think, well, the first thing going through my mind that happens quite a bit is not negotiating condom use, or, you know, who brings a condom? Can you ask them? Is it rude to say, will you go get a condom? Or are you okay if I use one? And if people are kind of pushing back or acting awkward, that's not very nice. It's pretty unhealthy sexual behavior to not agree to have protected sex.
Right.
And so, yes. What was your question? Sorry.
So that's kind of a big deal.
It's a really big deal.
So is there a place for, I mean, should sex always be protected as a single sexual person, or mostly? Like, how do we navigate that? I'm assuming that not everyone would use a condom because maybe it doesn't feel good, or maybe it's not convenient, or maybe they don't trust that it'll do the job, or whatever. Why isn't it just natural for everyone to wear a condom? And is there ever a place for not wearing it? And if so, how do you navigate that?
Those were a lot of questions.
Yeah.
I think that it's okay to do whatever you want to do as long as you're upfront with the person. I mean, it's not up to me to say you shouldn't be having that risky sex. That's up to them, but they better be communicating that with their partner. You know, there are quite a few people that feel just fine as long as they are constantly getting their checks and they know their partner, they trust their partner has been had a recent STI screen and whatnot. And then, I mean, that's up to them. That's not up to me. But as long as they're not lying or manipulating their partner about their status and whatnot.
Can I ask a question about that, John?
Please.
What's your opinion on asking to see an STI or an STD test? Anybody? Someone.
It's pretty common nowadays to ask. And I've had a lot of people ask me that, clients in particular, you know, where we'll talk about safety, as safe as you can be in engaging in sexuality with someone else, sexual experiences. And outside of this culture, people are there. Like, they are saying, you know, they have apps nowadays. You can upload your the results, you know, and those types of things. I mean, I think that there's a lot of unsafe sexual behavior going on out there, risky, certainly, but there's also a lot of things that are just common just to ask when the last test was. I mean, even if you're planning on having protection or using a condom or whatnot, still good practice to ask.
Is that even reliable to be asking people about their most recent test? They can just lie. They could have had some sort of sexual, interaction between their last test and now. Like, man, it just seems like a really fraught world. It almost just thinking about, like, could I get infected? Do I have to ask for this? It almost just makes me feel like, oh my gosh, maybe the church was right. This is way too complicated and fraught to even mess with all this stuff. Can it be managed in a reasonable way? In a healthy, reasonable
absolutely
way?
Yeah, I think I mean it's just there's as much risk to that someone can lie as there is with just dating them in general, right? But I think it's important for that to be, like, having conversations like that. That's a really great, like, heads up for how the relationship's going to go. I mean, that's pretty vulnerable. You're practicing negotiating, really, this is serious. It's serious, I mean, I'm not in the camp that likes to be fear mongering with this, but there is a large amount of risk that can come with it. And if you're negotiating this with someone who's all of a sudden you're starting to feel guilty for bringing up the use of protection, like, good to know. Like, that's a really good indicator of where that person is with their own need, putting their own self first, maybe, or and then disregarding your needs.
Love it.
Love that idea.
Ryan, did you want to add to this question about STIs and how to?
Yeah, I guess from the male
from
the male perspective, and again, hopefully my internet's solid here. It's a constant balance of risk where it's like, number one, for the most part, guys don't like to wear condoms. Number two, on the flip side is they don't want STIs and they don't want unwanted pregnancy. So you're trying to find this balance, and there is a lot of asking. Some guys don't, but I think for the most part, if guys are going to have unprotected sex, they're like, okay, well, when was the last time that you've had unprotected sex? When was the last time you've been tested? There's some very important protocols there, because if you're not being safe, then yeah, it absolutely happens. I think there's some recent data out that, certain STIs are on the rise, especially here in Utah. I saw something recently, especially with younger groups, teens. Gonorrhea jumps out in my mind for some reason. I saw some data on that. So it's out there and it happens. And you're kind of, if you're not in a committed long-term relationship where, you're comfortable that, the person's not sleeping around with somebody else, then it's a hard, you're trying to walk a fine line, especially if you don't like to wear condoms every time. So it could be a challenge.
Michelle, did you have something to add about this discussion of STIs in your experience?
No, I was more like a question on my part too, because it is kind of an uncomfortable thing to talk about. But, and it's like, well, how often should you be screened? And maybe Kristin, you can kind of talk about this too, but I mean, should you be screened after every new partner? Should you be screened once a year? Should you be screened, are you okay to have sex with condoms before being screened? Just kind of what are your thoughts on that?
That is just up to each person. I think that pretty typical kind of understanding out there would be that if you've had unprotected, I don't want to be just sex, but even like oral sex can, I think that a lot of people would probably go get tested after that, but most are just once a year, I think, if they're for the most part practicing like protected. But it's so different for everyone, and men and women have different kind of practices there as well, and that can get kind of.
How do you get tested? What's the best way to get tested? Cheapest, most effective?
I walked into Planned Parenthood.
Planned Parenthood.
Yeah, you go in there. I mean, a lot of times insurance will cover it. It's not too expensive.
Yep.
Okay.
Or just your women. We typically have an OB or sexual health professional.
What does it usually cost? Just the copay then, or?
Well, Planned Parenthood will do sliding scale, and then usually, there will be like once a year, usually preventative and whatnot checkups. What can include for women can include STI screens.
Great. Kristin, what's the next point on your list?
shared values, which we've talked quite a bit about here. And I just really quick on this, I will say it's okay to start at, if you're kind of reevaluating your values with this, my opinion is it's okay to start with I think, I think that I, really don't want to get into the kinky stuff, but I really like this stuff, and saying, but I don't know, I'm figuring it out, So that's kind of a random example that just came to my mind, but yeah.
It's very good.
Excellent. Okay. So we've talked about shared values. Does anybody else want to add anything about the importance of discussing shared values with your sexual partner, or is that Paul?
I mean, the only thing that I would add is that this is the fun part of dating. This is the part where you're no longer potentially shackled with anybody else's values, and you can figure out what your values are. It is daunting. But at the same time, like I said, I mean, it's interesting. And I think, like Kristin just said, to say, I think is probably how I phrase most of my values now. I'm pretty sure about some of them. I think about some of them, and I am feeling other ones out. I mean, that's just the way life's going to be now. And
Paul, what are some spectrums or categories of sexual values?
I'm only going to have sex with one partner. I'm always going to use a condom until I'm in a committed relationship. And then it's, I'm never going to be in a committed relationship, and I'm going to tell people this is what I'm going to do. I mean, I think when they're your values, it's what has meaning to you, what has meaning to me, to Paul. That's what it comes down to.
Love it.
Yeah.
Kristin, what's next?
Honest. Number 5 is honest, being honest. I think that kind of is a really great framework for all of these, being honest. I will say the one with this topic, it can get a little, because it's important to distinguish between private and secret, and so sometimes that can get a little like iffy, because there are a lot of people that will hear, okay, honest sounds good. I really want that to be part of my healthy sexual, my framework that I want to work from. Does that mean that as soon as I meet someone, I have to tell them who I've been with in the past year, or do I have to tell them my whole history? And will that make me dishonest? And so sometimes that's kind of difficult to negotiate, but I think it can be done through possibly distinguishing between, well, that's private, and I hope to be able to share that with you one day, or saying something like that, versus I'm going to keep this a secret, and then I feel kind of shady about it.
So honest doesn't have to mean over disclosed from the very start.
Right.
And I would add to that, I was on a date with somebody a while back, and literally he told me, how many women he had slept with. It was just like, as soon as he found out that I was no longer in the church, it was word vomit. Just like how many women he'd slept with, how, just all these experiences he had, and just started talking to me about sex for like the next 2 hours. And to me, that was way too much honesty. I don't need to know how many people you've been with. I just want to maybe know if you have an STI, like if you lie to me about that, then I promise you this relationship isn't going to work out, So I think also just kind of having a pulse on the person, trying to gauge, are there red flags that maybe something doesn't feel quite right about the things they're telling me. But there are some things that don't need to be shared. And that, you don't, it's okay not to share your whole sexual history. I mean, if there's things that are important that are going to affect the other person, then absolutely it should be shared. But
that's such an interesting point. As you're talking, I was thinking how really too, you can, I don't know, maybe end up in situations where people are treating you like an authority figure, where they're almost like confessing to you, like, oh, and I've done this and this and this, where you're like, really.
Exactly.
It's all good.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Any other comments on honesty? All right, Ryan.
I think my last one. Yeah, just real quick. Yeah, I'd say honesty and openness is going to be good whether in a committed relationship or even something casual. Maybe you have different motives of, hey, I'm interested in something physical, and it's good to be honest and open about that. I mean, there's definitely a culture of friends with benefits. It's out there, it happens, but it's good to communicate that. You don't want to hurt other people's feelings because if you're closed off and you're trying to hide your true intent, that's only going to create problems.
Great.
So Kristin, how many points do we have left?
Just one.
What is it?
Mutually pleasurable.
Mutually pleasurable. Let's talk about that really quick. Then I have a follow-up question. Mutually pleasurable. Why isn't that self-evident, Kristin?
I don't know why it's not self-evident, but it's kind of not, I think, in the culture at large. But one of the things that I think is underneath this is just the culture at large is not good at checking in with each other about what each other likes and what they don't like, and just overall, and so just it's all still part of negotiating the sexual experience and showing and using your voice and showing up, and also being okay with the other person disagreeing and providing feedback. And I mean, it's mature. It's really mature to have healthy sexual experiences. And so it sounds easy, it sounds self-evident, but in practice, it can be really anxiety provoking or really awkward, and a skill set that needs some work.
If somebody were to say, oh, go ahead, Michelle.
I was just going to say yes, and everybody's different. And so it's not like there's one recipe. Everybody's different. And, people are, and especially granted, I'm not a man, but I feel like especially with women, there are definitely things that are more pleasurable to some women versus others. And so it's about figuring that out. And I would say to the men out there, not to be put off if maybe the woman isn't orgasming during sex or whatever. I mean, there are definitely different levels. Women have very different bodies and different abilities, and especially coming from like a Mormon background where everything was so, your sexuality was turned off. Sometimes there's like that mental aspect to it, emotional aspect, where it's hard to get to a place where you feel safe and comfortable and where it is pleasurable for you.
So it's not always about I think Natasha calls it penile vaginal intercourse / orgasm.
Yeah.
Right.
Such a good point.
I think the only thing I would throw on there, and this is so anecdotal, but I hear it enough that I think it's important, listen to them. Don't assume that, if you're with a partner that's, male or female or whatever combination, and someone's saying, I really am good. Like I had a great time. I don't need to orgasm like Michelle just said or whatnot. Listen to them. Don't assume they're lying, and maybe call out, I'm going to choose to believe your words. So please tell me, because I don't want mind reading in my relationships. It's just a nightmare, so. Yeah.
So important.
One thing I found when I was counseling at Utah State was just the very basics that a Mormon man would have sex until he ejaculated and then he was done. And there wasn't really a lot of thought for the female satisfaction, let alone satisfactory efforts to help the female achieve orgasm if she wanted to. Is that a pretty common scenario within a Mormon or even a post-Mormon culture or not?
Yes, I think it's common.
Okay.
Well, and even if you look at us culturally, in watching movies, it's pretty fast. It's depicted in a really quick, very mutual, happens at the same time type of way. So it totally makes sense where it could be like, okay, 10 minutes, we're done, right? You're good, I'm good, right?
Right.
The breakdown.
And all of this really stems from women in their sexual response cycle being compared to men. And we're making a long headway with that. But I think a lot of times, you get perfect storm of not negotiating about these things, not knowing that you should be able to, and that that's healthy to talk about what each other likes in order for things to be mutually pleasurable, but mixed in with, so anyway, I forgot my train of thought, but it a lot of times will end up with the result of the woman thinking she's broken, or the partner thinking that she's broken because it didn't happen for her like it did for the man.
Exactly.
So.
Got it. Okay, it's about time to be wrapping up. I want each of you to think about a closing statement. Paul, you should be familiar with closing statements as an attorney. About, being single and sexuality. If you had one sort of message to leave. But before we actually fully terminate, I'm just going to ask one final question. Is there, and this is a two-sided question, it's about sort of hookup culture and sort of like casual sex. Is there joy to be found in casual sex that isn't committed? And is there a dark side and a downside to that as well? Or is it just pure party? Really quick, does anybody want to jump in and address that two-sided question? Michelle.
I think it depends on the person. I think that's very individual. I think for some people, casual sex would not be okay. For some people, they are okay with that. And I think that's a personal decision. I think there are a lot of risks involved in casual sex, for sure, emotionally and physically. So I think you need to be careful. But I think it doesn't make you a bad person necessarily, unless, like Kristin's point, there's maybe something that's not consensual, or I can't remember what the point was, but it's coercive or whatever, so I think it's up to the person really, but there are risks. So you need to recognize that.
Okay. Ryan, quick answer.
Actually, I think Michelle just did a great job of describing that, where, it does need to be a mutual thing, and it doesn't have to be done in a healthy way. It depends on the person, but absolutely, as long as both people are getting value out of something, as long as they both recognize that, hey, this is something that's casual, and they don't have kind of larger expectations, then it can be done in a healthy way if it's done right.
But can there be a downside to it? And if so, what's the downside?
Yeah, the downside is the opposite. If one person has different expectations or different desires than the other person, where, again, going back to, hey, we're all sexual beings. We all have this drive, where if you could do it where you're satisfying each other and, providing value for each other, then it can be valuable. The downside is if you're not on the same page and the other person wants more or is expecting more.
I'm just wondering if sometimes, it can become lonely or just detached or unhealthy to just kind of, to be sleeping with anything and lots of stuff all the time without any sense of commitment, if that can present its own psychological problems, maybe.
Yeah. And also I think, maybe it's, the grass is always greener on the other side, where some people in a committed relationship, there's people out there who are exploring swingers. They want to kind of bring in some new, spice to their sex lives. And they say, hey, we want to kind of explore outside of these bounds. Mm-hmm. So, there's people who are doing that as well. So,
Okay. It's time to close. Kristin, I'm going to give you a chance to end first, because I know you may have a client in just a second. So Kristin, give us your closing thought, and then tell us how people can get a hold of you if they want to seek out your services.
Okay. I guess just a final thought, I guess it might be a tip. Try to make integrity your, the top of the list in whenever you're trying to navigate these new waters. If you hold just how can I demonstrate integrity and offer that the same to those that I'm with, or the person that I'm with, that can provide kind of like a thread for figuring out what your new values might be, and they might be some of the old ones, but that could be kind of helpful. Like, treat people the way you want to be treated. That's something too.
How do people get a hold of you, Kristin?
My practice is Intimate Connections Counseling, and you can email at info@intimateconnectionscounseling.com.
All right, Kristin, we love having you.
Thanks so much for being here. We sure appreciate you.
Feel free. Thanks for joining us.
It's good to see you. Bye-bye.
All right, Ryan, you go next. Closing thought. Start over. Your microphone took a second to kick in.
Okay, hopefully you got me now. I'd say, I have a lot of friends who have kind of gone through this transition of, okay, we're starting to explore sexuality in a new, kind of post-Mormon non-believing world. And they could be frustrated. They might look back and say, man, I feel like I missed out on so much. I have to kind of make up for lost times. They feel kind of a lot of pain where, they missed a lot of sexual activity during their prime. Guys, once they start getting of a certain age, their libido might start dropping, or, their activity might start going down. So I'd say, look at this as a positive. You have a whole new menu of things. You can try new things, explore yourself, explore your sexuality. There's a lot to learn. We haven't even talked about homosexuality in here, but I feel especially sorry for, homosexuality and the pain and suffering that they're feeling, kind of holding everything inside. Where, now, and I'm not homosexual, but it is something you consider, certainly nothing wrong with that. But now, as, kind of entering into this new world, I feel optimism. It's, hey, I can kind of be who I am. I don't have to live in kind of a cage with the confines and the prescription of what a religious institution wants me to be. I can work on being a natural, healthy self. So that's my final word, is just,
Great.
Again, wherever you land softly, but don't live in fear, and, do explore with what you can be comfortable in doing.
Right.
All right, Ryan.
So great, Ryan.
It's been great to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Paul.
I think my closing statement would simply be that if there is uncertainty in your life, don't run away from it. Embrace it, and embrace it with an open heart and an open mind. And it can be fun, the uncertainty.
Embrace the uncertainty is Paul's message.
Yes.
So true.
All right, Paul. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Paul.
Good to see
Let's
you
hang
guys.
out soon.
We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Michelle, you get the final word since you helped us make this happen.
Yeah, I would just say, just do it. Just do it. No, actually, I actually wouldn't say that. I think, I actually have been thinking a lot about some situations that I've been in where people find out that I'm a post-mo, and I think there's kind of this weird, it's like when you find out somebody is maybe willing to have sex, like you think that they will have sex with you. And I think that we need to remember that just because somebody is willing to have sex doesn't mean that they just want to have sex with everybody or anybody, you still want to have you still want to care about the person. At least for me, it's something that I feel like is still, it's not just nothing. It's still something that is, can be a big deal. I don't think needs to be as big a deal as the church makes it out to be. But I do think that it's something that does have consequences, positive and negative. And so you just have to be careful in navigating the waters, and also take care with the people that you're navigating this with. And think it out for yourself. Think really, it took me like a good year just to think through all of this and figure out what was and wasn't okay for me. And so, I think it's okay to take your time, and, but also, if you're still feeling shame and guilt, see a therapist, Kristin Marie, she's awesome, or whoever, talk about it, get out there, figure it out, because I think it's an important experience for all humans. And, I don't think it has to be tied to marriage.
Beautiful.
All right, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks for organizing and making this happen. We'd love to have you back sometime.
Wasn't it great?
What'd you think?
I'm so glad we did this.
Yeah?
Honestly, yeah.
Learned a couple things?
Yeah.
All
It's
right.
just really insightful.
Well,
Thank you, guys. For your
Thank you.
candor and
All right. So we'll just give a quick shout out to our executive producer, Amy Grubbs. She makes all this possible behind the scenes. We also want to give a shout out to the newest member of the open source family, Cody. Cody's joined us for the first time as a producer as well, and we're grateful Cody's here. We want to thank everyone who makes this possible. We want to thank the board of directors of the Open Stories Foundation. We want to thank everyone who donates to make this possible. Please, if you value this content, please don't be a free rider. Please contribute at mormonstories.org, mormontransitions.org, openstoriesfoundation.org, wherever just $10, $20 a month can make the difference between this continuing or not. So please do donate. Those of you who tuned in live, we want to thank you for your comments and questions. We were able to get to many of them today, but not all. Please feel free to message us with ideas or questions. We'd love to continue the conversation on the blog at mormonstories.org. So please join us there as well. And we just want to thank everyone for tuning in, and those who are listening asynchronously as well. We're just grateful to have listeners. So please stay in touch and let us know how we can provide you with content that's meaningful to you. And thanks to my lovely wife and my brilliant wife, Margi, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, hon.
I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It was fun.
All right, everyone. You guys
Thank
take
you,
care.
everyone.
Thanks again. And we'll see you all guys again soon here on Mormon Stories Podcast. Take care.